But Senator, are you suggesting that heroin and prostitution are an exercise of liberty?
Well, you know, I probably never used those words. You put those words someplace. But yes, in essence, if I leave it to the states, it's going to be up to the states. Up until this past century, you know, for over 100 years, they were legal. What you're inferring is, you know what? If we legalized heroin tomorrow, everybody's going to use heroin. How many people here would use heroin if it was legal? I bet nobody would put their hand, oh, yeah, I need the government to take care of me. I don't want to use heroin, so I need these laws.
I never thought heroin would get applause here in South Carolina.
Warning, some viewers may find the following footage deeply disturbing.
Genius.
Hi, this is Kurt Wallace with Rand Paul Review, and we have a great guest today. We have Martha Bueno. Martha Bueno is heavily involved in the Free Ross effort, and now it's happened. Thank you so much for that. And she was also a candidate for county commissioner of Dade County outside of Miami, or that is Miami. And then I would call you, Martha, an anti-influencer on X as opposed to an influencer. You take down the influencers and the absurdity and the lack of common sense. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
Well, the thing that I have, what's really sparked my interest in inviting you on is all of the things that you have talked about on X in terms of the failed war on drugs. It's been an utter failure, a lot of death, a lot of destruction, a lot of unintended consequences to this effort by the government. Prohibition didn't work in alcohol, it hasn't worked in drugs, and it never will. It doesn't make sense, and it really approaches it from the wrong angle. So I guess what I want to start out with, just picking your brain, because there's a lot to unpack, is what do you think is the biggest misconception about the war on drugs and what people still believe today?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. The war on drugs has been a failure. And I think the biggest misconception is that somehow, if we keep doing this thing, we're going to get it right. Eventually, we're going to do something different within the same parameters that we've been doing that's just going to change things. And I know it, kind of one of those things that everybody says is the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and somehow expecting different results. So for me, I think that the war on drugs is exactly that, and a definition of insanity. We have been trying this same war for almost 100 years, or definitely past 50, hardcore, at least over 50. And it only gets worse. And we're not getting any better, and it's never going to get better. And the reason it's never going to get better is precisely that. We just, there's no way that a government, by putting people in jail, locking them up, is going to somehow solve the problem. It's impossible.
Well, what do you think in terms of your stance against the war on drugs? What was kind of your big aha moment, or what do you think it was that made you see things differently?
Oh, wow. I feel like I've always kind of had this notion that the war on drugs was failing, but my biggest aha moment was I have a close family member that is an addict, and having to deal, his drug of choice is meth, unfortunately. And it's been well over 20 years that I have been in this, I guess, struggle with him, for him. And it taught me a lot. It taught me that anybody can be an addict. I certainly wasn't expecting somebody so talented and so otherwise a good person, somebody that I love and care for so much, would have reached this point and been in this place where he can't get out of it. And it made me look at it, because I think for a lot of people, it's like, well, addicts are bad people. Addicts are just these degenerates, and all they want to do is do drugs all day and commit crimes and hurt people. And then when it happens to you, when you see somebody that you love, that you care for, that you know that that's not their reality. They're not a drug addict because they want to hurt people. They're maybe a drug addict because they were hurt themselves, or because of the addiction being too strong, or because of some other factor. And you see it happen, and I think it opens your eyes. And then you add to that the fact that I've been a libertarian, and that economics is one of the, and I didn't study it in school. I didn't study it in college, but I learned over time that I just love economics. And so the more I read, I'm like, that makes sense. So let me get this straight. If we incentivize, this black market, then there's going to be more. And in that black market, it goes towards prohibition. The same thing that happened, in the 1920s here in the United States with the prohibition of alcohol, we see it repeating with drugs. And so it's like, well, I also like history. So you see, there's like this, the iron law of prohibition is one of those things that I talk about quite a bit. And it's in order to move drugs across borders, or move alcohol back in the day. Beer is the number one thing that Americans drink, but during Prohibition, it was whiskey or moonshine or something even stronger, because a little bit of that will get you the same buzz that maybe 5 or 6 beers would. So it's easier to move it along. And the same thing is happening, and drugs will just keep getting stronger and stronger. So it was a coupling of just knowing, basic economic theory, history, and then seeing a loved one that was like, well, this is something that I think we really need to start talking about in a different way. And I kind of started embracing you know what, I'll throw myself under that bus. And so I recently posted, this is what a marijuana degenerate looks like. Hi all. Hi, my name is Martha, and I am not addicted, but I certainly do enjoy cannabis every now and then.
Well, okay, so you mentioned several things. The personal story, I think most people have that. Most people know someone who is addicted to drugs or has alcohol problems, and has a loved one. Even Donald Trump, his brother died of alcoholism. He was interviewed by TMZ, the main guy on TMZ. I can't remember his name right now, but he asked him about that. He said, "You've never drank alcohol or done any drugs?" And he says, "No, because my brother died from it. And as a result of that, he decided that if he ever tried it, maybe he would automatically become an alcoholic if he has the same condition, same circumstances his brother had." And, but it's hearing about your personal, yeah,
Same
yeah.
reason. Yeah.
Um, Yeah. So, what do you think is the most overlooked consequence of the war on drugs then to a person's freedom, their property rights, their individual liberty?
All of those things, but I think the most evil thing we do is we kick people when they're down. And
Mm,
so, I think that's the most evil consequence, because if you're an addict, you're probably not having a great time at home. Like if you're married to an addict, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, you're
mm,
probably having marital problems.
mm,
It's very difficult to be married to somebody, or if you're a single parent, you're already probably struggling to put food on the table. You're probably struggling with your children. You're probably so at that point where you're in addiction and you're having all these hard times.
mm,
Then the government's like, you know what? We're going to throw you in a cage, and we're going to give you a criminal record. And so that to me is the absolute worst thing that we do, because there's no way to get out of that situation. Okay, you
mm,
complete your time in jail. Your
mm,
children are without a mother or a father or whatever the case may be. If you were the breadwinner, your family goes without those funds.
mm,
And then you leave jail, and what do? You're now a second class citizen. You can't vote. You can't arm yourself, so you can't defend yourself. And more than likely, you can't get a job, because who wants to hire a felon? Who wants to, be associated with a felon? And it just, we really do the worst thing to addicts that we could possibly come up with. And I find it so hypocritical to a point, because when you have an alcohol addiction, we have AA, we have, like, oh, well, you have a problem. You have an addiction problem. Let's help you. Let's be compassionate. You know, um, we do things like, I don't know, sober January. I mean, there's entire organizations out there to help people who have, for example, an alcohol addiction. But when it's with drugs, not so much. And so we really do some terrible, awful things to people. And that, I think that's something that just, it's not the America that I think we all want to be a part of. I think that that's something that our government decided, and we've kind of just gone with the motion for years, and we really aren't understanding what we're doing to these people.
Yeah, that's that stigma is a real problem, and that is fostered by government. Just like a lot of the racist issues are fostered by government, and for people to understand that government is the cause of a lot of these problems. But thank you for that, and I would
You just mentioned it. Could I interrupt you for 1 second?
yeah,
Because you
please
just
go ahead,
mentioned
please.
racism, and that is the basis for the drug war. And so, and I find that so many people aren't aware of how this kind of started and escalated a little by little. But every basis of our drug war is based on racism of some kind. With marijuana, it was those brown people love to say, I mean, even the name marijuana, cannabis is the actual name. I sometimes use marijuana because I understand that a lot of people don't really know the difference. But cannabis is its legitimate name. It's the name of the plant. It's Cannabis sativa A. It is the name that was used. And then because Mexicans, Hispanic people, were using marijuana, and they named it that, but it's not even called that really in Mexico. They don't, so it's just a pejorative word. And then, you see the Henry Anslinger type of quotes, and it was like, well, Black people want to, sleep with white women, and that's because white women are on drugs, and and it's always about racism, and that's how it started. And so I think that if we care truly about racism in this country, which so many people claim to care about, then how can we just ignore this one big racist issue that on top of that has given the police the ability to put people into jails, the ability to break up families. There's a crisis amongst people of color with lack of father figures in the home. And a lot of that can be attributed to males being locked up into prisons. And I mean, it's just destroyed the fabric of America. So I'm glad you kind of mentioned it, and I'm throwing it in there because I think that any conversation on drugs really needs to look at racism and honestly, racism on behalf of the government, because that's who was doing it.
Well, no, I appreciate you talking about that because it is such a multifaceted issue. The war on drugs is not just a war on drugs, it's a war on a lot of issues. It had the spider web of consequences that this program has had has been it affects every human being, whether they realize it or not, in this country and outside of this country. And it brings me to another question that I actually wasn't going to ask you today, but I do want to ask you after we had a pre-interview about immigration and how the war on drugs has affected the immigration issue and our relationship with our friends south of the border, and Mexico being part of North America and then Central America and parts of South America. Do you have anything to say about that? What's your take on?
I always have something to say.
Sure, no, I'd love to hear it, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think well, first of all, the United States government is involved in trafficking drugs. I think that's something that it's, I say it and people don't really like to hear it, but it's the truth. And, we have proof of this, the Iran-Contra affair. We know that the CIA introduced drugs into LA. I mean, we know these things. It's not me, conspiracy theorist Martha strikes
Tom
again.
Cruise. Tom Cruise did a movie about it.
Right. I mean, it's a thing. We know this. We know that the United States is involved in the trafficking of drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And so we also know that the United States has forced every other country on the planet to engage in the war on drugs and make this an illicit market. And South and Central America are no different. And a lot of people who end up leaving those countries and coming to America seeking a better future are leaving the policies that the United States themselves introduced with the war on drugs. So again, you have people that are suffering in Latin America, in Central America, because, for example, it's more profitable for these people to grow marijuana in their fields. But because it was illegal or still is illegal for them to grow it, cartels come in, you either accept the cartel to protect you or you don't, and then you're at risk. So it's it's such a terrible situation. I think Colombia is a perfect example how you don't get rid of the cartels. The cartels just grow into government. Gustavo Petro, the current president of Colombia, was a leader of FARC, the Colombian cartel that terrorized Latin America for so many years. So, I mean, it's we. If you're paying attention and you know what to look for, you can see how, for example, Cuba, their reign on the country, the regime's reign on the country is based on the traffic of drugs and the traffic of people. Colombia, the same. Mexico has a problem. And now we have their governments coming out and saying Claudia Sheinbaum, who just won the election in Mexico, which, by the way, had 36 candidates for office murdered, and not just murdered, like decapitated. I mean, we're talking about all out cartel warfare throughout all this region. She came out and said, you know what? Cocaine isn't any worse than whiskey. We don't want this anymore. We don't want this war on drugs. And the United States, with their heavy hand, is going to force it to continue this operation. So it's a lot of really dark information to know, but we can't ignore it anymore. Our government is involved in a cartel. They are the world's largest cartel, and it's time that we we do something about it. And ending the war on drugs is the thing we can do. Of course, government's not going to let go of that. It's not going to happen. It's not something that, even when they do, in the case of marijuana, they're like, all right, fine, let's give you marijuana. It's now legal in 39 states. But in California, they can't get rid of the illegal market because their taxation policies and their, licensing structure is so difficult that it's still easier to be an underground grow and whatnot. So even when the government's like, fine, we'll give you one, we'll let you sort of start growing cannabis for your health or whatever, they still mess it up. And they're still very much making a lot of money off of it. Here in Florida, the license to grow marijuana is at least $25 million, if not more, because you have to buy it from somebody else. So they're making a lot of money, even with the legalization of it. And so I don't think we have any real path right now to ending this problem, which is why I'm speaking out about it. I think that we really need to start having this conversation, and it needs to stop being about, oh, you're just a drug degenerate that wants to do drugs. It's like, okay, but also, we really need to talk about these issues, and
What does
we got to start it.
So what does the war on drugs ending look like in terms of the issues with these countries that are south of the border? I mean, it's pretty obvious that drug cartels create destabilization in these countries. It's fed by the war on drugs. It's a marketplace. It is economics. These people who suffer from that are just your average people who just want to live their lives. And so they flee.
Mm-hmm.
And where do they flee to? The United States. So the war on drugs is a direct impact on this immigration issue that we've had. But there's a real cause for that. So my question is around that piece, but not so much that. It's just, what does it look like if we end the war on drugs? What does that look like? What happens? What are the ramifications of that, or the consequences of that for these countries?
Well, I think for everyone, but certainly for these countries, I would love to say it's going to be all kumbaya and rainbows and butterflies and everything, but no, there are going to be some issues when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the war on drugs looks like, when it ends, is going to be when drugs are completely legal, and I mean all drugs. Every adult 21 and over should be able to go into their pharmacy and say, I want X, Y, and Z product, and receive it. And I know that sounds crazy. People are like, well, what about fentanyl? Well, fentanyl is legal right now. So what does it look like once these countries are not forced to have the war on drugs? Colombia is probably going to be the world leader, Colombia and Peru, on cocaine. They're really good at it. It'll be shipped over to America and processed in Bayer or Pfizer labs or whatever. It's going to be just like buying Tylenol, where you go to your pharmacy, you can purchase it, and then people will have access to safe drugs. And what that does for the rest of the world, for example, let's say Colombia, and you are somebody who has farmland and you want to grow coca leaves. Well, now you have a market and you're inclined to stay and grow your leaves and be able to export and be able to have a legitimate business versus and be able to call the cops if something happens to you, because now the coca people growing these leaves or whatever, they are forced, if something goes wrong, to defend themselves, or to be involved with the cartels. So it's just about legalization is always about who you can turn to for help. It's always about just being able to go towards authorities versus this war with them. And it looks like, I think, for some time being, I'm sure there'll be a lot of chaos once legalization is achieved. I think there will be some chaos. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to start trying drugs that they would have never have tried otherwise, whether because it's for a stigma or it's because, well, now it's clean, so let's go try it. There's going to be a lot of that. And I mean, a lot of people would never touch it. So what does it look like? I think it looks like freedom, to be honest.
So you're talking about legalization, and in terms of free market, would you put an emphasis more on that versus decriminalization? And do you have a way to describe the difference and which ones would impact better in kind of your view, which is more of an accountable drug market in a sense?
As a libertarian, I'm always like, decriminalization is the way to go. But I think that you can see decriminalization in action here in America, and you can see it in Oregon, you can see it in San Francisco. It's if it's decriminalized, what that generally means is the government isn't going to prosecute people for it. But it also doesn't create an open market. So while you can possess the drug and not go to jail, you can't manufacture and sell it. Ergo, you still have the problem of clean supply. And I think that that's a big issue, especially with the harder drugs. But we also see it in cannabis. I was just today seeing a new article on how most of the legal cannabis grows are still giving you tainted products. And that's because, for whatever reason. So I think that a legal market, despite my very heavy libertarian leanings and wanting to be, I want to come up here and say, no, we should just decriminalize and everything's going to be great. I think we need to baby step it. And I think that it needs to be a legal market where there's some type of regulation. Now, I'm not in favor of the government regulating us. I think that professional organizations do a much better job of regulating their market and their industry. But what we have, our system currently, it's mostly the government regulating it. So it's going to be FDA. And I mean, oh God, I can only think of it and be like, but baby steps. At least it's gotten somewhere and it's better. That I think that's also an issue that as libertarians, as people who are speaking about these issues, it's like we should have this, and we paint a picture that scares Americans. And I don't want to scare anyone. I'm here to give factual information and say, listen, adults 21 and over have a right to their body. And by the government saying you can't use this substance, what the government is saying is, I ultimately own your body and I decide what you can and cannot use. Because as a responsible adult, I mean, if I want to consume something, whether that's a beer, a joint, cocaine, whatever that substance is, it is only my right to choose that for myself and nobody else's. And so I think it goes into an even bigger issue as to who owns our bodies. Do we belong to the government? Is that something that we're willing to, to say, no, the government has this right about me? And so I think it's going to look ultimately very beautiful, but the way to get there is going to be a little bit of a rocky road.
So, yeah, I interviewed actually your governor back in 2013 when he was a congressman on the legalization of marijuana in Florida. I think it was around medicinal purposes. There was, I can't remember exactly what it was
that was
about.
at the very beginning of medicinal here in Florida.
Yeah, and so so how do you see the legalization of marijuana changing this broader conversation around drug policy?
Well, like I said, I mean, Florida is a disaster with our marijuana policy. And I mean, we are in a state that is a vertical system. And so there was 22 licenses up until just last year, just after Amendment 3 failed, and then they opened it up and there's 22 more licenses. So that's 44 licenses in Florida. And, they they gave, I don't know if it was 2 licenses to people who had won a lawsuit against the state, the Pigford lawsuit, which was for Black farmers. But up until that point, the licenses that had been given out in the state were only given to very big players who then sold out to multi-state players. And so we have this conglomerate of, these big players. Like I said, the license is worth well over $20 million. There's some licenses that have sold for over upwards of $200 million. Of course, that came with structures and whatnot, but it's a very expensive license. You don't have any real minority ownership at all. I myself attempted to get a license way back when. I have a farm. I come from a long line of my dad and his dad, like a fifth generation farmer. And I really wanted to get into this plant, and I wasn't able to. There's no way for somebody that doesn't have mega millions to get into this. And so what do we see? We see, first of all, it's just more expensive here in Florida. It costs a lot of money. And then on top of that, you need a medical card. So you need to spend $75 to the state and 2 doctor visits, averaging $200 a piece. So you're $500 deep before you get anything of cannabis for your medical conditions. And so when hemp was legalized, that was kind of the back door. And so we have what in Florida, what used to be the taxi medallion Uber issue all over again, but now with cannabis. The legal market is the taxi medallion market. It's expensive. Only certain people can do it. And then the hemp market is kind of a free-for-all. It's an Uber. You can just get into anybody's car and, see how that works out for you. So we have this very broken system. It doesn't really work well. It's making some corporations a lot of money. It's bankrupting others. I kind of got involved in the hemp market, and the state of Florida gave me a license, and then they yanked it for a few months. And in that time period, I just couldn't make it work and ended up closing up my doors. So I've been involved in this war with the marijuana stuff. Ron DeSantis, who we were talking about, did veto that legislation. So hemp is still legal in Florida, but it's kind of a free-for-all. It's a mess. It's just not a good system. And so I think government really gets it wrong most of the time. I've never seen them really get it right. I know, like, people like to point out, look at Oregon, it's such a disaster. It's like, yeah, because the government did that. Yep, absolutely. Even in California, they can't get it. They can't get their marijuana stuff together. It's just government isn't good at this. The cartels somehow are better at regulating their own selves than the government is.
Yep. Well, they're in it for business, so they're operating like a business that makes sense, but they also don't have government regulations and have to. Well,
comply.
I wonder sometimes if there are lobbyists in Washington D.C. in behalf of the cartel. I do wonder that because of the businesses that have benefited from it, and we're talking about legalization, but at the same time, it's not working really well in Florida. But having it done state by state gives us 50 incubators that can provide, better solutions and opportunities. Can we go back a little bit though and talk a little bit about the prison systems and how policies have worked in terms of private prisons and how that's worked? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Like I said, I always got thoughts on stuff. Yeah, absolutely. It's really terrible when we have to rely on this system that we do to make money off of what they're doing to our people. So yeah, the private prison system makes money the more people are incarcerated. It's like a hotel. If you don't have people staying in your beds, you're not making any money. And so it's a system that feeds into itself. It's just, they're going to go lobby government to continue to make drugs illegal so that they can keep their beds full. And then they make more money. And then we taxpayers pay for those prisons. So there's no client really that's going to go into the prison system and be like, let me see how much you're spending on X, Y, and Z, because the client is a taxpayer. And we know that the taxpayer just, we're not conscious of all the little amounts of money being spent here or there. So it's a very bad incentive of, again, going back to, economic principles. If you have a way to make money, it's going to be incentivized. The more it's incentivized, like, it's just the spinning wheel of, it's going to grow bigger. And then, of course, in order to get people into those jails, you need a bigger policing system. So that's going to feed into the policing system. And the police also have their own incentives, including things like confiscating your money, when they can just take it for whatever cause. I'm blanking on the word right now, but yeah, anyways, they can just take all of your money when they hold you prison, like they take you to jail. And so it's like, it's a never ending system. It's a loop that just feeds itself. And if we wanted to end these problems, I think we really need to start talking about that as well. The private prison system is just, it's not working for Americans. It incentivizes the wrong things. It does not incentivize, getting out of the war on drugs. It's going to perpetualize a problem. It's just, I'm very frustrated, I think, with how things are going right now, and the fact that we taxpayers have to fund it. I think it's to adding insult to injury. It's just adding salt into that wound, and it's frustrating.
That you touch on a lot of things, and one of the things that kind of it reminds me of is remember the guy that was in Baltimore. I think it was in 2015. I think his name was Gray, Freddie Gray, or I think that was his name. And it sparked a riot in Baltimore. And what it was you had a man who obviously had a health issue, the disease of addiction. He had a rap sheet of, I think, 18 charges over 15 years or something like that. A majority of them were possession of drugs. So the police arrested him, hog-tied him, threw him in the back of a van, and broke his back, and he died. The police killed this guy. Not, I don't think it was intentional, but they roughed him up. And this is how drug addicts are handled. That's how they're treated. That's how police are supposed to. They're trained to handle it. They're enforcing the law, and they're programmed to enforce that law on these kind of people because they are stigmatized, and that's just how society operates. The consequence of that was a massive riot in Baltimore, and that is the result of this action. What's the guy's name that in 2020? I forget, for some reason he's been martyred in Minnesota and Minneapolis. Thank you to the Rand Paul Review community for your support of The Kurt Wallace Show. We are now syndicated on Spotify. For those who are new to Rand Paul Review, become a subscriber today. It's absolutely free to join. Go to randpaulreview.com, put in your email address. You'll receive our newsletter, articles, and podcast interviews. We just ask that you share our content with others. If you like what you're getting from Rand Paul Review and you want more, I encourage you to become a paid subscriber for just $8 a month. You'll receive full access to exclusive articles, behind-the-scenes interviews, and the community chat room. Plus, we're giving away tons of swag in 2025. Annual subscribers get 20% off, so check that out. Whether you're a free or paid subscriber, thank you for your participation and support at randpaulreview.com. Man, what is his name? Anyway, that guy was on fentanyl. George Floyd, yeah. He was on, yeah, he was doped up and couldn't breathe because of that. That was part of the toxicology report. Now they put, they're everything happened the way it happened. But at the end of the day, when that interaction occurs, yes, he was committing a crime. That is not negotiable. You commit a crime, you harm someone, or violate their property. That's a crime, regardless of if you're on drugs or not. Doesn't matter.
Right.
That is a separate issue from what we're talking about. But somebody that's on drugs and they obviously have a drug problem, there is no protocol for that to say, okay, this individual's on drugs. How do we help that person rather than feeding them to this private industry that,
I think
is
that's
benefiting from it. The prison system, prison
yeah,
industrial
it's
complex.
what we do in America. It's like because you may ruin your life with drugs, we're just going to ruin your life for you and throw you in a cage. It's not a system that I think most people think about. It's like anything, right? If you're just educated on this, and at this point, the war on drugs is older than the vast majority of the population. So you've just been hearing about this. You were educated in school, and you heard about Dare, and you heard about all these things, and these people are horrible. So you don't really give it much thought,
It's kind of like the IRS. We don't.
right?
We,
We don't.
think, we know something's wrong with it, but we can't put our fingers on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to start another wormhole, but I'm known on X for my stance on circumcision, and I feel that that's another one that people just don't think about. They just do. But it's
Mhm.
yeah, we really hurt people by being like, oh, well, you might hurt yourself, so let me hurt you before you do. And I've met a lot of, especially young people. That's the one that really breaks my heart when I've met people that were like 16, 17, 18, whatever, and they were caught with a joint or whatever, and then they were thrown in a cage or they were given some type of rap sheet, and the thing that I hear over and over again is how they tell me, I thought I was bad. I was ruined. What's the
Mm.
point of trying anymore? I already have a rap sheet. Like, what's the point? I'm already messed up. And I think, when
Mhm.
you hear these stories, it's like, wow, there's no compassion in this. The bleeding heart liberal that's like, oh, where are you right now? Like, I want to be. Let's go with the bleeding heart, solution to this, which is to stop. And yet, we don't have any consensus. The only consensus we have across political ideology is to keep this thing going and to just hurt people. And oh yeah, let's get more taxes. Let's
Mhm.
grow government. Let's do more of the things that aren't helping, and let's have no compassion towards them. I mean,
Mhm.
every day I hear people on X just telling me like, well, those people don't deserve anything. Fine, ship them off to Haiti or whatever. It's like, what? These are your friends, your family, the people that you interact with. I mean,
Mhm.
we really are lacking a compassion issue. And I don't know if it's a compassion so much as the just brainwashing or the rhetoric that we hear day in and day out and the lack of questioning things.
Well, treating a health condition and people that understand the disease of addiction, it is a health condition. It is not a choice for those people. And I'm not saying that people don't choose to do drugs. Yes, there is that, and the person chooses to do it the first time. But if they do have the addiction, they're not intentionally uh, craving drugs all the time and having to have it all the time. That's not the way that they expected their life to go.
Right.
And living on the street and doing the things that they are doing to be able to cop and in a dark world. So they're automatically living in the shadows because the just by doing drugs, you already are a criminal. You're a criminal because you've done drugs. And if you can't stop, it's a perpetual cycle. And that's a real loss because there are some wonderful people that have had addiction and they're prominent, well-known people. Philip Seymour Hoffman was addicted to heroin. He was in recovery for 25 years and then he relapsed and he couldn't stop and he took street heroin and we lost a great actor. I mean, for me, he was a great actor. I don't know his politics or anything like that. Sometimes I don't care. I try to ignore their politics, even though I don't like their politics or whatever, the way that they treat other people. And I
Addiction
enjoy
is
their,
a problem of unfortunate problem of people who don't have the means, right? Because if you have the means, a lot of the times you're not an addict. It's just, oh, you take
Mhm.
something on the side. I mean, you just mentioned somebody famous that I think a lot of people liked him as an actor. But I
Mhm.
mean, Elon Musk has never been shy about talking about his own use of, I don't know if it's Adderall or ketamine. I mean, he's talking
Mhm.
about his
Sure.
own use. He uses it recreationally all the time. Do I believe that Elon Musk is going to the street to buy heroin or I'm sorry, ketamine? No, he's probably buying it off of a doctor that is providing him with the same stuff that, so
Mhm.
and he's very involved with the government right now. And I bet you he's not going to go to jail for his ketamine use. So, and I mean, look at Hunter Biden, right? He literally was doing heroin, recording it with his devices, and it's out there for the world to see. He was using prostitutes, which is also another, illegal thing to do, but nobody really cares. And that's the thing. If you have money, if you have power, then you have the ability to do all of these things. So this is really, when you really distill it down to it, it's a crisis against poor people. It's a crisis against people who don't have the means, the way to do it. I'm openly saying that I'm that degenerate marijuana user. I'm willing to bet
A
that.
very articulate degenerate, by the way.
But nonetheless, nonetheless, every now and then I do partake. So I'm putting myself out there because I know that chances are that Miami-Dade County Police aren't going to come storming down my house to arrest me. I know that I have a very good probability of, even if they do, being able to afford a good lawyer, to get me out of that situation. So I've decided to throw myself into this ring. And you know what? If people think something different of me because they now know this, that's fine. But because I want to show that, I want to show that if you are of a certain demographic, you can get away with it. And Elon Musk is a perfect proof of that.
Well, I really appreciate what you're doing in terms of trying to change the narrative and have a conversation about it. Somebody has to do that. It's vitally important that we talk about it and we keep an open mind and not let cognitive dissonance keep us, asleep. In terms of policy, if you could dismantle one specific policy tied to the war on drugs tomorrow, what would it be and why?
God, I can't pick. That's like picking one of your children, or
Right.
which one of all the awful ones would really make the biggest difference. I'm sure there's laws that should be repealed versus, trying to implement
Okay.
new rules. But unlike the prohibition in the 1920s, we don't have a constitutional amendment. So honestly, I think it's just a collection of things that have just escalated. And I don't believe the government has the actual right to do it. So I don't know where I would pick.
So you have like the 1033 program, which militarizes police based on the war on drugs. So you're funneling money and weaponry and forcing the police to, or incentivizing the police to utilize it. They have to in order to keep. That's like a big one.
That is a big one.
And that's also helped to brainwash law enforcement as to what a drug addict is and an alcoholic versus somebody who
that police are, the ones enforcing it, because police also, and of course, I'm not generalizing. I have a lot of friends who are police officers. I really love I'm not trying to pick on them, but they do have an issue of domestic violence, and alcohol addiction is really high amongst a lot of police officers. So it's almost like, they can see that, being responsible is important. And then on the other side, they're criminalizing these people. So, I mean, it's just such a terrible, terrible situation to be in. It's so convoluted. There's so many things that are wrong with this whole scenario. And the fact that we put people who have their own issues in charge of trying to police other people and their issues, it's a bad, bad, bad situation. I don't think any of these laws are going to help us get out of this situation. And I'd like to see a repeal of all of them, to be honest. And, we didn't need all of those laws in the first place. So let's just, let's do Javier Milei and afuera, everything out.
Oregon did it the wrong way.
They did.
Decriminalization of all drugs. And so
while also stopping the police or the enforcement of the rules, like possession or intoxication laws and so on and so forth. So they did both. They decriminalized and then they stopped pursuing the laws that they do have on the books. So
really? Okay.
They see that addicts are in a park using, and they're like, oh, well, that's why we can't have it, because look at what happens. No.
Well, it has to be coupled with some sort of a solution that actually addresses the systemic problems that people have with addiction. We circle back with, I think you said your nephew. Is that correct?
No, I didn't say. I just said somebody close to me.
Okay. Okay, somebody close to you. but everybody has that. Everybody, if you don't, you're not really interacting enough, or you don't have a big enough family. And maybe that is the case for a few people,
Yeah.
but for most people, somebody that has a problem, and that is a different relationship, and that's a different way of approaching it. Why does that person have a problem? How do we address that problem? How can we help them, not just personally, because you have interventions and you have those sorts of approaches, but as a society and the narrative around that problem of addiction? What is it that we're doing wrong that drug addicts don't ask for help? And I would say it's because they think they're criminals. They're not going to ask for help because you're already stigmatized. You feel bad about it. So destigmatization and education around the issues of addiction and what it is.
Yeah. They
Uh,
can't actually ask for help in a lot of cases. If possession is a crime, then you're not going to go to police and say, "Hey, I need help," or you're not going to go somewhere when possession is a crime, or when the doctor that is helping you has to call, you know, services and report you. So the criminal, again, like we can just keep going down that rabbit hole, but every quote solution that we're told just has further consequences, and it's so unfortunate. It's so absolutely terrible.
Martha Bueno, thank you for spending some time with us on Rand Paul Review. Definitely want you back and talking about some other issues as well, but this has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Genius.